Okay, it is difficult to imagine why a person would not express their opinion when given the opportunity. Without expressing one's displeasures or support on a certain topic or issue, there is no way of responding. America, promoted as the freest country in the world, sometimes fails to properly respond to people's needs, although it may not be entirely their fault. The poor voting turnout in the United States election drastically affects the nation's inhabitants. This is highlighted by the government not properly representing the population and political groups benefiting from people not actively involved in the government. There are only two definitional terms that need to be addressed before I begin. That would be incumbency, which is holding an office or the period during which one is held, and dark money, the political spending meant to influence voter decisions, and politics where the source of funds is undisclosed. It is simply not a democracy if only half the population votes, especially if young voters fail to come out. The lack of representation in government leads to minorities' needs being ignored and more benefits for the rich. The youth of this generation should be one of the most concerned with their vote, as they will be living with the policies created and passed. Sadly, this is not the case. From age group of 18 to 24, only reported 39.4% voted versus 61.3% from age group 31 to 65. This provided by the survey conducted in 2016 by the U.S. Census Bureau. Without the young vote, it makes it significantly easier for politicians to make decisions that poorly represent the community. This affects the access to health care, the distribution of wealth, and even civil rights. While only 31% of the population are white males, 97% of all Republican elected officials and 79% of all Democratic elected officials are white. This strong influence of incumbency is another factor attributing to race and gender imbalance. It was reported that 52% of elected officials run unopposed, with 87% of them being white. The information provided by a study conducted by the Reflective Democracy Campaign, who investigates and disrupts the demographics of power in the United States. It is apparent that minorities fail to be represented physically in government, but how about legislatively? It is difficult for an elected official to represent the views of the population who don't vote. The minority vote has been steadily decreasing since 2012, especially African American voters, who saw a decrease of 7.1%. Provided by an article by William H. Frey, an internationally regarded demographer known popularly for his research on urban populations, migration, race, and many more. The U.S. Census Bureau conducted a study in 2014 counting more than 20 million children under 5 years old living in the United States, and 50.2% of them were minorities. Minorities are not going anywhere as they increasingly become a greater percentage of the American population. It is a great injustice to continuously disregard their representation of minorities and students who make a considerable part of the community. To my second point, it is no secret that most of the population is unaware of the major shifts and decisions that go on in the American legal system. The affects the active participation of American voters and in turn allows them to be taken advantage of. Taken from an article by Soman, a professor of law at George Mason University, who focused on the study of popular political participation and its implications for constitutional democracy. Political ignorance in America is deep and widespread. The current government shutdown fight provides some good examples, although Obamacare is at the center of the fight and much other recent political controversies. 44% of the public did not even realize it is still law. Some 80%, according to a recent Kaiser survey, say they have heard nothing of it at all, or only a little, about the controversial insurance exchanges that are a major part of law. People are less willing to vote in an election where they know little to nothing about the policies the official is campaigning. Without the active involvement of a diverse group of citizens, elected officials can narrow their campaign to target specific subgroups. Because of the bulk of the population is not politically active, it is easier for incumbents to hide policies behind the front of their campaign and provide benefits to organizations and/or persons that provided support during their campaign. Dark money is abundant in its influence in politics. The Center for Responsive Politics calculates the political organization spent more than $15 million to influence the 2016 elections outside of a party or officially campaign structures, while only $5 million was reported to the FEC. The Treasury Department plans to end requirements that certain tax-exempt organizations identify their financial contributors on their tax returns. Stephen Munchin, the Treasury Secretary, fears that this law will allow groups to withhold even more information from the public and from the government. With the ability to receive money from private supporters, there is little to no incentive for campaigning officials to be more transparent about their policy. Transparency of an official is important deterrent in preventing foul policies, but now he or she no longer needs to, as she can now be backed by more money from their current supporters. In conclusion, the lack of voting in the United States is negatively affecting the population. This was shown by the unfair and unequal representation of minorities in the government and the ability of the government to take advantage of voters who are not actively involved in politics. Thank you.
Excuse me. All right, well, the proposition's clearly identified, so I think you're fine there. The contents of the speech, I didn't really hear a preview. I could kind of hear a couple of the issues that you're talking about. There is a definition of incumbency and dark money. I know as you get into it, there's this argument about the lack of representation, and you kind of use some generic terms to discuss that it's not really democratic. I think you need a clearer declarative statement. Now, at the end of the speech, when you're doing your summary, I thought it was a lot clearer than it was at the beginning of the presentation and in the body of the speech. So there's got to be a way to do that and translate it so it's easier for us to follow at the beginning. The data that you have on people not voting, I think, is pretty straightforward. We've got some statistical and factual data about the groups that vote, and you give the source citations on that. I think that's pretty reasonable. There are some inferences being made about that, though, that I think require a little bit more documentation. For example, that certain policies are ignored, or that constituencies are ignored because they are not the voters. I think there's a presupposition here that only people who vote end up getting any benefit from government services or a care from or protection from the government in regard to issues that they're faced, and I don't really see much demonstration of that. Mostly, like I said, that's an assumption that's being presented here. Particular policies, you make a general reference maybe to some tax policies, but that's about as close as it comes to being documented that there is any particular harm there. The second point, when you suggest that the dark money influence is, there's a problem that's going on there, that there's some influence that's going on. This is also a little bit vague. It comes down to $15 million in spending. I wouldn't be surprised that much money was spent on a single congressional committee campaign. It's got to be a lot more substantial than that, and I'm not sure that even that demonstrates that there would be a substantial influence by a special interest group or a policy or even a constituency because they provided that, especially on a nationwide level. That seems really, like I said, kind of a small amount in the total what gets spent in terms of what gets spent on electioning. Let's see. No, that's basically the argument he's making. The presentation is a little problematic. It's all reading, and because some of the claims are a little bit abstract, I think that you are less convincing than you would be if the statements were more declarative and less esoteric. Like I said, at the end, I thought that you were a little bit more forceful about that. So there's generally some good evidence in the argument. I think that your original claim, your main proposition is relatively clear. The supporting points are a little bit abstract, and you need to work on reading less and talking to the audience more. All right, thank you.